Hello, this is Wmpyr. Let me first start this video off with three books that really influenced me in the martial arts. So the first one, of course, is The Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee. The second one, I would have to give it to Get Tough, written by Captain Fairbairn. This was for World War II soldiers and special ops and whatnot. And the third one, and this is what this video is going to really be about, is this third book, which is The Grappling Master, written by Gene LeBell, Judo Gene LeBell. And yeah, so that's a really cool book. And I got this book before the UFC. So this is pre-UFC, before the world understood how effective grappling was and what ground fighting was really like. Like no one really, a lot of people didn't really understand that stuff. And here is Gene LeBell publishing a book on grappling. And the book just it showed like a ton of different moves that was mixed with professional wrestling moves and also moves that were more closer maybe to the martial arts. But this book was published as a martial arts book. And like I said, it had professional wrestling moves and stuff all jumbled in there. And it was really designed to show you how to stretch a person on the mat. And by stretch a person, what I mean is how to basically dominate and destroy a person on the mat in grappling. And I just thought it was a fascinating book, especially for me because I had been a huge fan of professional wrestling. I had been watching it in the U.S. and then we moved to Japan, so I watched it in Japan. And then when we came back to the U.S., I continued watching it over here. And in Japan, I got to see some pretty crazy stuff at the time, which was the 80s. There was like I remember seeing the last match that Tiger Mask had, where he was wearing martial arts pants, like PKA, Professional Karate Association. So kind of like that, like the way Benny the Jet used to compete and stuff. So he wore these martial arts pants, and then he was wearing sambo shoes in the ring of professional wrestling. So I remember the commentators were trying to explain, and they were saying that this guy is trying to evolve. He's trying to evolve his professional wrestling style. So they explained it like that, and I didn't really understand, back in the day. But something I could tell something was happening, something different. And of course, the emergence of the UWF over there in Japan, where they were getting much closer to catch wrestling style and getting closer to today's sport of MMA. So all that was kind of like on the emergence at the time. Not quite there yet, but getting there. And I remember seeing all that, and then of course seeing Judo Gene LeBell's Grappling Master book. I mean, it was all, how would I call it, my backyard kind of thing. My interest was there in as far as like grappling and martial arts are like this. So it kind of linked professional wrestling with martial arts, and me being a big fan of professional wrestling, of course, that sounds super cool to me. So this book I really liked. And one of the first things that he teaches you in the book, right? And like I said, he just shows you a ton of different moves in there, and it's just wild to see some of these moves. Unlike, and I think this is one of the biggest differences for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When that came into the picture, it was like, wow, that blew me away. But Gene LeBell was showing the same kind of moves, these finishing holds, chokes, joint locks, and brutal techniques. But the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of showed you the setup of how to get into the moves. Gene LeBell showed you a million different moves, just the amount of moves was ridiculous. Whereas in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it wasn't so much the amount of moves. The amount of moves were much, much more limited. It was more about like how to get into it, the setup. So that was, very interesting to see that difference. But so, and of course with Gene LaBelle, the man is built like a bear. So to see the guy just doing these nasty moves and making these crazy faces in the pictures, it was just something else to see. But back to the first thing, one of the first thing that he teaches you in the book is what he calls the LaBelle slap and catch. And that was basically he just slaps the opponent's hand and catches the wrist with the other hand. Okay, so bam, bam kind of thing. And it was really cool because from there you go into a million different moves. You could go into moves where you pick the person up or you take the person down, and you go into all these different holds and chokes and whatever. So it was the start of getting into those moves. And so the LaBelle slap and catch I thought was really cool. I just didn't know where it fit in the realm of martial arts, in the realm of self-defense and combat. I just didn't know where to place it, but I always thought it was cool. It took me all these years to understand, but before I get there, now let's go into traditional martial arts, because at the time I was training in traditional martial arts. In some ways it wasn't, but in many ways it still was, because the instructor was mixing a bunch of different styles together, and that's where I had my first experience for Filipino martial arts. But like, for example, one of the common ways that we trained, and you see this in a bunch of different styles of traditional martial arts schools, is that the student throws a punch and the instructor will block it and then demonstrate the technique, right? And then the students now pair up and then they practice that, right? Whatever was shown, they replicate that and they get repetitions. Okay. And then what I've seen is, like I said, the student throws the punch and basically freezes after that so that the instructor can do whatever they want. And the instructor goes on and sometimes will show options, right? And we do something similar in the Filipino martial arts. We call it lock flow. And the instructor would be like, you could go into this lock, you could go into this joint lock, you could do this technique, you could do this throw, this takedown, this choke. And it just shows you a bunch of different options, these different techniques. And there's two really, really huge problems with training that way. Okay, so number one is the options part. In real life, you don't want options. In training, sure, okay? In training to increase your knowledge and understand, everything that can happen, yes. But in real life, we don't want to, it's going to confuse you to have, you could do this, or this. That's not a good idea. In real life, everything goes by super quick. So you don't have the time to be thinking about these options. So it's a bad idea. To me, it tells me if they're teaching it that way, they don't know how to fight, if that's all they do. So that's one problem. The second problem is even a bigger problem, and that is you simply do not catch a punch. You don't catch the punch and then from there go into all these moves. You're able to do that in the dojo because the student freezes and stops, and that's why the instructor can do that. So learning-wise, I think it's fine, right? Learning-wise, you do that, and then you can go into these different techniques, and then it's really about getting familiar with and practicing repetitions with the different techniques. It's not about the block the punch and then catch it. That just doesn't happen. You watch the UFCs, I don't know what number are we on by now. I mean, there's been hundreds of UFCs, and I've never seen it once. Not once has anyone ever caught a punch and went into a joint lock of some kind. Never seen it, right? The closest thing I've seen to that was two fighters did it. Number one is Volk Han in rings in MMA over there in Japan. And Rings was an organization where I think it was like, I don't know what percentage, but some of it was worked and some of it wasn't. But it was definitely, headed towards the MMA combat sport, because it also birthed guys like Minotauro, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, right? So, yeah, and of course, the last emperor himself, Fedor Emelianenko, comes from Rings as well. So Rings was, in some ways legit, in some ways, and I don't want to say not legit, I want to say worked. It was worked. So, but Volkan was one of those guys that did a wrist lock, what they call an Aikido kotegaeshi. He did that. Another guy is another MMA fighter is Imanari. They call him Ashikan Judan, which is leg locks 10th degree black belt. That's his nickname. So you can imagine he's amazing with leg locks. But anyway, both of those guys I've seen do the wrist lock in the world of MMA. And the way that they did it, they didn't catch the punch. They just immediately grabbed the guy's wrist and did it. Okay. So it was about speed. They grabbed it and just pulled it off, and the guy didn't expect it. So the guy had their arms up and just, it was taken, and that's how that was done. So it's not off of grabbing a punch. So I want to make that clear. So what I am suggesting here is this kind of training that we do in traditional martial arts, where the guy throws a punch and then you block it and then go into all kinds of locks and whatever. Let's stop doing it. Let's stop doing it because it gives the wrong impression. When I teach my students, and if I do something like that, I tell them that this is out of context. This is just to learn the technique. This is not the way I believe the application will go. You're not going to, the other guy's going to punch and and then go into this, wrist lock or whatever. That's arm lock, or that's not how it's going to happen. It doesn't happen that way. It never happens that way. So I want to make that clear. And no matter how much I explain and tell people that that's not the way it's going to go, it's really tricky. People have a hard time understanding. So I feel like it's super misleading. Super misleading. So I think we should, as a whole, as martial artists, maybe we could evolve and stop doing that completely, okay? And going back to Grappling Master now. So when I go back to Grappling Master, the label slap and catch, I said to you guys, now, after all these years, finally makes sense to me. And I'm sorry, let me get... My voice was starting to go there. Excuse me. Okay, so the slap and catch, I told you guys that I didn't know where it fell into place as far as actual real life application. And by real life, I mean self-defense. And now, after all these years, I feel like not only do I think I figured it out or where it falls into place, I see that it's super effective and it's really makes sense to me. And that is when a guy on the street, when they have a weapon, or they're going for a weapon, or you may not even know if they have a weapon. Even at that point, it looks like they don't have a weapon. You don't know if they're carrying one, and at any given point, they could go for it. So it only makes sense to control their hand. And if they do have a weapon, you definitely need to control their hand, because unless you have the confidence to knock them out with one hit, or you could take them out with one hit, they're going to use that weapon on you. So, and obviously that could be devastating. So you need to shut that down. And to shut that down, there's really only one thing you could do, is to control that hand, right? So grabbing the hand becomes priority. And in that case, you need to be close enough to be able to grab their hand. And that grabbing of the hand is what Gene LaBelle was teaching in his book, Grappling Master. And it just makes a ton of sense. So in the street, I'm going to be more about control. I need to control that hand. It's not about who could duke it out better, because if, like I said, unless I could take them out with one hit, if I'm giving them time to duke it out, they might pull out a weapon, and that's just going to be devastating on me. So I need to stop. I need to stop that, and I need to grab a hold of their wrists. So from a self-defense perspective, now it makes total sense. In a combat sport perspective, if the other guy is really good with their hands, which they might be, or they have the ability to hurt you with their hands, they don't even have to be that technical or that great. If they just have the ability to hurt you with their hands, then you need to keep track of that hand. You need to control that hand. So even in combat sports, it makes sense. It makes sense. Now, there are plenty of fighters that don't do that, and they go in and they willing to exchange shots, or they feel like they're better at evading and slipping and landing their shots, and they're willing to play that game, but it's still risky. So the safer thing to do would be to control that hand. That is the safest thing to do. Even if you decide to change levels and shoot in for a double leg takedown, there's always a risk that you could get knocked out by a flying knee or something like that. So to me, that's more risky. The safest way, like I said, is to actually go in and control the hands, whether it's sport or street. And so this is why I'm making this video, with this new sense of admiration and appreciation for Judo Gene LaBelle's book, The Grappling Master, that I owned back in the day. And the LaBelle slap and catch is the technique that he had taught in that book. And it just makes a ton of sense, more sense to me now, more than it ever did. And that's it for now. Just wanted to share that with you guys. Thank you for viewing, and take care, folks.